The medical work in the Bogra district of Bangladesh began in 1938. In 1988, the Churches of God of North America celebrated the 50th anniversary of the medical work in the Bogra district. From the early beginning, this work has grown and been blessed of the Lord. We have some of the people who have been involved in this work here. E. Fidelia Gilbert, M.D., Beth Beers, R.N., and certified midwife. Donna Sleesman, registered nurse. Mary Thornton, BSN, nurse midwife. And John Brenneman, MD. Dr. Gilbert, you won their love and esteem. You brought them life physically and spiritually. Will you tell us why you started the medical work in 1938?
I was about 8 years old when I heard missionaries Howard and Viola Cover talking about missions to children. At that time, the Lord gave me quiet assurance that He wanted me to be a missionary. My parents wanted me to be a doctor. Talking with Mrs. Cover and reading Mother India, a book very popular at that time, I learned of India's need for lady doctors. I went on to college and medical college. Those were years when I was growing spiritually. I learned that it was very important to know God's will, to be ready to follow Him wherever He leads. And a verse that became very dear to me during those days was John 15:16. Ye have not chosen me, but I have chosen you, and ordained you to go and bring forth fruit, and your fruit shall remain. With this assurance, I set sail in 1938, the first medical missionary for the Churches of God in Bogra district, and also the first qualified lady doctor within a radius of 150 miles.
With so many sick people, you must have been busy from the time you landed.
Well, I had to learn the language. During the time of learning the language, I saw a few patients. At that time, I was seeing them on the porch just outside my own bedroom and using my bed as an examining table for the lady patients. And then in 1941, we opened the clinic on the west side of the mission house. The porch was used as a waiting room, and by my side was Mrs. Chamat Bishash, a trained nurse and midwife. We worked together for the next 31 years. In our predominantly Muslim culture, it was not possible for women in middle and upper class to be attending a clinic. Therefore, it was necessary to make home visits. In the morning, I would be busy with the clinic, which had increasing numbers. In the afternoon, I would go to visit the women in their homes, those who were very sick or those who were not permitted to attend the clinic.
Dr. Gilbert, tell us something about the mobile clinic you had.
Well, the mobile clinic was a dream of Glenn Alderson and myself. We felt that the women in the villages would not be permitted to attend a clinic in town. Therefore, Glenn designed the clinic car, or the clinic van. It was built on a Ford V chassis in Calcutta by Chinese Christians. Glenn died shortly after that, but our young pastor and evangelist, Shadish Bishash, asked if he might learn to drive the car and also to learn something of motor mechanics. We were glad that he wanted to do that because our desire was to have evangelism go hand in hand with medicine into the villages. We would choose a village where there was a need, and there we would hold a clinic one day a week. That would continue for several months. And then we would move on to another village where there was a need also, and where the roads were passable.
You mentioned that you enjoyed obstetrics.
Yes, I did enjoy obstetrics. It was my greatest love in medicine. At first, of course, I was called only for abnormal deliveries in the home. It was very hard to teach the people that prenatal care was really very important. There was a Christian midwife, a member of the Bogra Church, who worked with me in home deliveries. She would go out in the early stages of labor and be with the patient, alerting me if there were any problems or when the delivery was imminent.
When did your building program begin?
Well, because it was so difficult to handle abnormal deliveries, we knew that we really needed the buildings. But it was really not until January 1950 that we finished and opened our clinic building. The delay wasn't due to money. During my first furlough, I had visited the churches, and they had given exceedingly abundantly above all that we could expect. However, during these years, India had been given her independence, and our part of India had become East Pakistan. There was a great shortage of building material, and many new buildings that were required by the government and others. It was not really until 5 years later that we were able to build the hospital and open it. That, again, was due to the shortage of supplies. Now, Beth Beers is with us today, and I'd like you to hear from her something of her experiences in the early days of her work out there in Bogra.
Yes, Beth, let's hear from you and tell us some of your experiences.
I too felt the call to foreign mission service through the influence of a former missionary, Minnie Lehman Whitman, now in heaven, who visited our Sunday school when I was 8 years old. But it wasn't until I was 21, after hearing Dr. Ironside's challenging message at a missionary conference, that I committed my life to the Lord. I then attended Moody Bible Institute and completed the missionary course. Later, through the encouragement of a Christian lady doctor from Central America, I entered nurses training, and finally in October of 1949, I set sail for East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, to work with Dr. Gilbert as her first American nurse.
And what were your duties as Dr. Gilbert's nurse?
As Dr. Gilbert said, our first duty is to learn the language in order to communicate with the people. At that time, we were allowed 2 years to study the language with limited responsibilities. While studying, I also worked a few hours in the clinic. That was helpful in learning because only Bengali is spoken in the clinic. Many times, missionaries are required to do things for which they are not trained. I not only used my nursing skills, but at times I helped with dispensing medicines and did some lab tests that Dr. Gilbert had taught me to do. After learning sufficient Bengali, I helped with teaching the children in Sunday school and Christian Endeavor meetings. After completing my language study, Dr. Gilbert's furlough was due, and in her absence I had to see and treat patients. That was a scary task, but I can witness to God's faithfulness. I'm sure my prayers and the prayers of many people here at home did more for the patient's healing than the medicines I gave in my ignorance. God never asks us to do anything for which he will not supply the wisdom. Let me put that in the positive. God always supplies the wisdom for every task he asks us to do.
Beth, was the hospital built when you arrived on the field?
No. When I arrived, the new outdoor clinic was just being finished. During my first term, the nurses' dormitory and the hospital were constructed. We did not have the advantage of having a building contractor, but we tried to follow the blueprints that a missionary friend had drawn for us. And with our faithful Hatem Dawan now in heaven as overseer, and a faithful Muslim mason who could neither read nor write, these buildings were completed. Many times Dr. Gilbert and I were asked for advice, and I often said how convenient it would have been to have been trained in that line of work. We met up with many difficulties and hurdles along the way, including delays in receiving needed funds from America, but in God's time, the hospital was completed and opened in 1955.
Where and how did you get the staff for the hospital?
Since the hospital originally was only for maternity patients, we needed nurses who were also trained as midwives. Most training hospitals over there also give midwifery training. After much prayer and correspondence, we secured 3 senior-trained nurse midwives and 1 junior-trained nurse. And at that time also, 2 of our mission girls were in training, who later, after finishing their training, came to work with us. That was sufficient for a few years, but as the work grew, we felt the need of training our own girls in our own hospital. Donna Sleesman will tell us now about the beginning of nurses training in our own hospital at Bogra.
A need for nurses to staff our Bogra Christian Hospital was the reason that nurses training was started. But there have been other benefits of the program also. It has been a means of an education for some of the Christian girls. This has developed their skills and also provided a livelihood for them and a financial help for their families. Sometimes their families are very poor, and so this is a great help to them to have a daughter in nurses training and working in the hospital. Offering nurses training is also a way to enable people to treat the illnesses of their fellow countrymen, or to teach them preventive medicine so that they will not become ill. This could be the description of a caring, good citizen reaching out to his fellow citizens of a developing, impoverished nation. Certainly a great service. Taking nurses training to become a good nurse is also a means to follow the Lord's command. In Matthew 25, the king had separated the people. To those on his right, in this end-of-the-age scene, he said, "I was sick, and you looked after me." These people asked, when had they done anything for him? His reply, "I tell you the truth. Whenever you did it for one of the least of these my brothers, you did it for me." By serving others, he was saying, we serve him. The psalmist also said, "Blessed is he who has regard for the weak." Nurses training has prepared and is continuing to prepare Bangladeshi nurses to skillfully have regard for the weak and to serve God by serving others. Training began in 1963 with 6 girls. They were taught general nursing, anatomy and physiology, diseases and treatments, nursing skills, while they worked full-time in the hospital. In Bangladesh, most learning is done by rote, so they must spend many hours going over the unfamiliar names of strange diseases, strange anatomy parts, strange medicines, etc. Working and learning indeed fill their days and their nights. It was a happy day for those first girls when they received their caps at a special service in the Bogra church. They went on to graduate and then to take the midwifery course offered to those completing nursing. They were the first of a good number who have benefited through the years. The training was stopped for 5 years, but it was resumed and it continues today. Long-time faithful medical personnel do the teaching. The graduates can register as junior nurses with the Government Nursing Council. Soon, a nurse who grew up in our mission will be sent for an advanced degree entitled Sister Tutor, so that she will be more qualified to teach. Then our school can be upgraded in the eyes of the government. Today, 25 years after training was started, half of the nurses in the Churches of God Hospital in Bogra, Bangladesh, have been trained in that facility. Where could we have gotten our staff had we not trained them? Many others have gone on to work in other places equally needy. One of them is with our village health program in the Kanchanpur area. You are special people because you gave and you prayed. These have been blessed and are being a blessing to those in need. Let us continue to help make all of this possible. Let us pray for those who are so faithful in the teaching, often another duty in an already full schedule. Let us pray for the students that they will learn well, and let us pray for all of the graduates that they will serve Him faithfully and skillfully wherever they be, Muslim or Christian environment, that God would use them greatly and honor their tireless efforts.
Mary Thornton, you joined the mission in 1970, and it was you who handed the charge to national nurses. Was the idea of handing over the work to national nurses a new thing to you?
No, not at all. In missionary college years ago, we were often told that we should try to work ourselves out of a job and hand over our responsibilities to the national staff. In fact, that's how I became available to go to help at Bogra. My work at the Baptist Mission Hospital, Chandragona, had been taken over by a local nurse.
And how long were you working with the Churches of God mission?
Just about 5 years, if you count the time I spent on furlough, part of which I spent visiting the churches in the States in 1974.
When you were on furlough, who took over your work at that time?
It was shared by senior nurses. I knew that my work was in good hands. At that time, we were particularly well blessed in having several experienced older nurses. Some had worked with Dr. Gilbert since the early days of the hospital.
Can you tell us something about those ladies?
Yes, Miss Shuhashi Bishash became the superintendent of nurses, or director of nurses as we would say here. Her name, Shuhashi, means beautiful laughter, and she certainly had the pleasant manner to go with it. Whether she was dealing with nurses, patients, staff, or visitors, and she was able to share her faith with others, and she certainly showed forth the love of Christ in her daily life.
Who were the others?
Miss Martha Morandi was the nurse tutor and was also superintendent of the outpatient clinic. She had been brought up by the mission and received her nursing education in India and West Pakistan.
Did Miss Morandi do all of the teaching of nursing?
No, Miss Conchan Halder taught the midwifery or the obstetric students. She was particularly knowledgeable in this area, having worked very closely with a lady doctor in Calcutta before coming to Bogra. In addition to her many other duties, Conchan was responsible for keeping up the stocks and supplies and giving out the daily and weekly requirements. She also took care of the mending and the ordering of new articles.
and she took care of every little thing as if she had to pay for it herself. I have never met anyone else quite so conscientious in this respect.
Mary, was the operating room usable and in use at this time?
Yes, and Miss Mina Horror became the head nurse there.
Was it necessary to have someone in charge of the nurses' living quarters?
Yes, a retired nurse, Miss Shabala Vishash, was the nurse's house mother. She took care of the housekeeping and cooking arrangements in the nurse's home and generally looked after their physical and spiritual welfare. She would also accompany the younger nurses if they wished to go visiting or shopping in the town. This was required by Bengali cultural customs, and I presume still is.
And then when did you return to Bangladesh after your furlough, Mary?
In March 1975. Everybody seemed pleased to see me and very anxious to hand back some of the jobs which I had given out. But when the question of my leaving to get married arose later in the year, I knew that they would be well able to manage without me again.
Now, were the nurses surprised to hear of your plans to get married?
Well, I told Shuhashi and Kanchan first, and they said that while it would be very unusual for a Bengali woman of my age to get married, they realized that in other countries older women often did marry. They said they did not want to lose me, but how could they object when the Lord had made such a good marriage arrangement for me?
Do all of these ladies still continue their work now?
Shuhashi and Kanchan still continue to serve faithfully. Miss Shabala retired a few years ago, and as yet no one suitable has been found to replace her, which means that many of her tasks have to be shared by the senior staff. Another qualified nurse now serves as head in the much busier operating room. A male nurse is head nurse of the children's ward and of the more recently added men's ward.
What about the nurse tutor, Mary?
Unfortunately, Miss Miranda became ill with diabetes in 1976 and died about 2 years later. Since that time, the work of teaching the nurses has been shared by various people, but it is hoped to have someone with the necessary training to fill this post in the not-too-distant future.
Dr. Brenneman, I believe you joined the work in 1969, is that correct? But because of the political unrest, you and your family returned to the States. After Bangladesh received your independence, you returned. Tell us of your work then.
We found that when we arrived back in Bangladesh after the war, the new nation of Bangladesh was in dire straits. The economy had been destroyed. There wasn't enough food to feed the people, and the medical system was inadequate to treat the patients. Added to this was the fact that many of the educated and professional people had been killed during the war. Countries around the world responded with emergency relief at first and later with long-term development relief. In that time of great need, the Kanjanpur missions were in a position to play an important part in helping the people of those two areas, both from a spiritual and a physical standpoint. The Bogra Hospital was a well-established and well-respected part of the community. And in Kanjanpur, the mission had reached out through the churches and the schools with love and concern for many, many years. Therefore, it was only natural that the mission would be in a position to help meet the needs of the people.
Dr. Brenneman, can you tell us something about the village work?
Yes. One of the great needs in the villages after the war was medical. Transportation was extremely poor, so it was very difficult for patients to get to hospitals, in the medical centers for care. Because of that, approximately once a month, our family would leave Bogra, go to Kanjanpur, and treat and examine patients there. We would work as a family, packaging the medicines for the following day's travel. Then in the morning, we would load up the Jeep, and with Rhoda Kaufman as our guide and constant helper, we would head off to the villages. When we would get there, Lois would check the children for malnutrition by comparing their height with their arm circumference. Any children who were found to be malnourished or chronically ill would be given powdered milk or some other substitute, some other food supplement to help them with their malnutrition. Miss Kaufman would take the names of the children, and she would continue to distribute food to these children on a regular basis in the months ahead. All those who were ill were given the appropriate medicines. As time went on, it became evident that something more than just immediate relief was needed, and we needed to work toward long-term development. As immunizations became available, we made the clinics more sophisticated, and they were designed to provide more preventive type care. If we could give the immunizations, we could prevent many of the communicable diseases, and by education of parents, we could prevent a lot of the dysentery which was in the area. One of the national workers was hired to treat common illnesses at the clinics on a more regular basis, and then we would go out on a periodic basis to treat and to consult on the more complicated cases. In 1975, a permanent clinic was established in Kanjanpur, and Miss Linda Kilheffer, now Mrs. Linda Bishosh, along with her national staff, ran the clinic. The Kanjanpur clinic has grown and still continues to serve that area faithfully under Linda's direction and with Dr. Miyasaki's consultation on a once-a-week basis for patients who have difficult illnesses to treat.
Was the hospital work progressing at that time?
Yes, while the outlying clinic work grew slowly, the hospital and clinic work at Bogra was bustling with activity. The women's clinics and inpatient work were being run by Dr. and Mrs. Dewan and Dr. Hosniera, both of whom had worked with Dr. Gilbert for many years. Later, Dr. Reba McField, who is Pastor Shadish Bishosh's daughter, joined the staff and helped with the clinic work. Just as nationalization took place on a governmental level in Bangladesh after the war, the mission also nationalized the medical work at that time. Dr. Sajal Dewan became the administrator of the hospital and the clinics. He also, along with that work, ran the men's clinics and helped as well with the children's work. He was later joined by Dr. Patrick Bishosh, who helped with the men's clinics. I worked in the children's ward and clinics, and in 1975, Dr. Victor Binkley started surgical clinics as well. I guess I don't need to tell you that the clinic building was a busy place each morning as 100 to 200 patients and their families arrived to be seen. That situation provided an excellent means of reaching out with the gospel, as Bible women and evangelists would make their way through the crowds of patients to witness to them about Christ. The children's inpatient service consisted of a 12 to 15 bed ward. And the majority of the cases on that ward consisted of children who were suffering from either malnutrition or dehydration immediately after the war. To further the work, a surgical suite was constructed in 1974. And it was at that time that Dr. Binkley and his family came to Bogra so that Dr. Binkley could establish the surgical work. Dr. Vick was instrumental in training and helping the national doctors to do C-sections and tubal ligations, as well as performing other surgical procedures as necessary. I would like to take a few minutes now just to describe the circumstances that surrounded the first operation in the new surgical suite. I do this because this is a good illustration to show how God has his hand on that work in Bogra and in Kanchanpur, how he provides the needs for both the medical staff and the patients at these two areas. It was just a day or two after Dr. Binkley arrived on the compound in Bogra that a young patient was brought to the hospital with a large abdominal mass which was causing bowel obstruction. It soon became clear that she was going to need surgery that day. And so it was decided that the surgery would be performed that same evening. Now it happened also that on that same day, we were unpacking a portable generator which the hospital had recently received. It was a generator that was designed to be used by the U.S. Army to power its field X-ray units. It had been packed away during the Cuban Missile Crisis many, many years before. As we started to uncrate the generator, we were amazed to find that it appeared to be in excellent condition. By noon, the generator was unpacked and all gassed up, and we thought we were ready to go. However, we soon discovered that although the motor ran very well, the generator would not generate electricity. Pastor Bishosh and one of the other mechanics on the compound came around and soon discovered that the brushes on the generator were frozen because it had been sitting so long without being used. Well, by late afternoon, after long and tedious work, they had it working properly. Now, as it turned out, as Dr. Binkley was beginning the operation that evening, the town's electricity went off, which was not an unusual occurrence. And we had to use the portable generator to provide the light needed for the surgery. Without the proper light, that little patient, who was cured by that operation, may not have had much chance for survival. Once more, we were humbled by the realization that God knows the needs of those who serve him, and he supplies those needs to the very last detail. This is a fact which gave comfort to the men and women, both national and missionaries, who were serving the Lord throughout Bangladesh during the post-war years.
And now, Dr. Gilbert, let's hear from you for an update. Could you tell us what's going on and some of the plans for this Bogra Christian Hospital?
The Lord has continued to bless in answer to our prayers and according to his promise that the fruit would remain. Since the Brennemans left, a men's ward has been added. And this also necessitated a redoing and updating of the septic tank and toilet systems. This was paid for by the Japanese Overseas Christian Service, a medical group. This medical group have for the past 8 years made the services of Dr. Mr. Miyazaki and Dr. Mrs. Miyazaki available to the Bogra Christian Hospital. Mrs. Miyazaki is a pediatrician. She has been greatly appreciated. The pediatric clinic and the pediatric ward are always very, very busy. Dr. Miyazaki, on the other hand, has been busy in the village work, as Dr. Brenneman has mentioned, but also he is a urologist, and he has been teaching Dr. Paul and a number of other national doctors concerning urology and some new and various surgical techniques. The obstetrical department is increasing in the number of patients. Dr. Mira Dewan is in charge there. The patients that come, of course, are very many of them are abnormal cases from the villages. And their cesarean section rate is about 24%. Now that seems high, but it's really comparable to the cesarean rate in the inner city hospitals here in our own big cities. The Christian Blind Mission of Germany have helped us in many ways. They sent Dr. Dewan to Ireland. There in Dublin, he studied ophthalmology, received his doctorate in ophthalmology, and when he was ready after 4 years to return to Bangladesh, they paid for a 16-bed eye ward. Also, they paid for the equipment, the surgical instruments, and the other examining instruments that were necessary in treating eye diseases. They help now with the salary of the staff. They have paid for paramedics also to be trained to help Dr. Dewan, and they are carrying on that work. They also plan to send a German couple to live in our Kanchanpur mission house, and they will be working with rehabilitation of the blind people in that particular area. Dr. Dewan goes to village clinics several times a month. He also, during the very hot season, has eye camps. These eye camps are mainly for cataract surgery, and they're financed by the Lions Club International branch in Bogra. The latest addition has been a center for the handicap. It is held 3 days a week. They are receiving those who are physically handicapped and those who are mentally retarded. Patients would be those with spastic paralysis, polio victims, and also Down syndrome. They help with the physiotherapy. They explain to those who are caring for the patients in their home how to care for these patients. The patients now number about 100 that have been registered for care. This is especially important, I feel, because in the non-Christian communities, these people would be looked upon as those who were cursed of God. While here, the Christians are showing them that God's love extends to these people as well. In fact, they're very special people to him. The Japanese medical group have paid for the building to house this particular handicap center, and they also are helping to staff it. Perhaps the most interesting thing to me is that Mrs. Monoj Dewan, the wife of our Bangladesh director, has been given the post of hospital chaplain. She graduated from Bible College in Melbourne, Australia. She holds devotions daily with the staff and has a weekly Bible class with the nurses. She visits the patients and helps them spiritually and socially, and also works in the handicap center. As from the beginning, the clinic work goes hand in hand with evangelistic work day after day. At present, they are building a new prayer room or chapel. They also have plans and have begun to build a men's and women's surgical ward. The staff quarters for a doctor is one of their immediate needs.
Dr. Gilbert, what do you see as the role of our churches in the medical outreach?
I think we could think of it in 3 areas. First, the matter of staff. They would welcome a full-time missionary nurse with teaching qualifications to help in the training of the nurses, as has been mentioned. The surgeons and dentists who might be able to give several months or weeks of help to them annually would be greatly appreciated. The financial need is another. The salaries and the routine maintenance are carried on by the income from the hospital. However, they need our help in repairing and in updating and replacing equipment. New buildings are also a great need. They are not able to finance these, such as the prayer room, the doctor's quarters, and the surgical wards, as we mentioned above. There, they definitely need our help. And then perhaps the greatest thing of all is that they need our prayers. They need prayer for physical health and for wisdom in just the routine daily tasks. Pray that daily they might recognize their utter dependence upon God, and may they desire to that He would be glorified in all of the healing. Pray for spiritual healing, for souls to be saved.